What is up, friends? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Beer to Talk podcast. Really exciting episode for you today with a incredible artist and wedding photographer, educator, Rebecca Yale, who is just one of my favorite educators, especially on something that so many photographers don't talk about. But before we hop into the episode, I want to tell you something that is happening tonight, exciting, on this day, Wednesday, July 1st. Tonight in our Facebook group, the Beer to Talk Facebook group, we are having Rebecca Viola, who had a past episode on here talking about Instagram marketing, building your following, and what kind of organic things can you do, like action steps, not just wait for people to follow you, to grow your Instagram following. If that's something you're passionate about, think that would help your business, and to try and find not just followers, but people that will engage with you and your brand and hopefully help you build your business. So I love Rebecca. She's incredible. She's going to give actionable tips and items tonight in the Facebook group. It's free to come. So togfb.com. We'll go live probably around 7 p.m. tonight EST, and there will be a replay in the Facebook group. So even if you can't make it, come hang out, join the group. We'd love to have you. All our free resources are there. And yeah, definitely come enjoy that. And so for this episode, we're talking with Rebecca Yale, an incredible artist, somebody who I found through asking a friend who posted a incredible flatlay. And I kind of asked him like, hey, tell me about this. How did you learn to do this? This is incredible. Is there any education on this specific topic? And at the time, I didn't know of anything that was as powerful and as packed as what Rebecca Yale was doing. And so, he told me about Rebecca Yale, and we talked about this in the episode, and she's just incredible. It was one of those things where you find one piece, like the tip of the iceberg, which is her flatlay stuff, and then she just turned out to be an incredible interview person, photographer, artist. So really deep, awesome episode with her. Love it. So without any further ado, here is Rebecca Yale. Well, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate it so much. I always think it's fun to tell guests, kind of the background of like how I got interested in you. Like, okay, like how did Adam find Rebecca Yale? And I would want to confess too that my choir teacher in high school's name was Rebecca Hale, and so this whole time, like I'd go to text you, and it would go to text my old high school choir teacher, which is a whole other life thing, 14, 15 years ago. So that has been very bizarre, but a Instagram photographer, we've talked a few times, and I want to get him on the podcast as well. But Rich Lander, I reached out to him because, that there were some stereotypes there, but I was like, he was a guy that was doing amazing flatlays. And I was like, bro, what is going on here? Obviously, you shoot different weddings. You're on the West Coast, we're on the East Coast, but like, how are these so amazing? And he was like, bro, I took Rebecca Yale's course. It changed my life. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, she's got like a downloadable PDF and a course and all this education around flatlays, and she really puts it well together. So I was like, oh, interesting. An instant buy. And it's one of those things too where it's like, oh, I do have to practice. And but over time, like the flatlays have gotten better, and I just feel more comfortable going into it on wedding day. So one, thank you. And two, that's a little, I don't know if you know Rich personally, but yeah, he's that's a little fun connection for you.
Yes, I do know Rich very well. He's amazing. Such a sweet guy. He actually took my course when it was still in person here in LA. I used to do in-person ones. And he was like our dark horse that as you said, like guys tend to not be as strong with flatlays in general. I think girls just like Instagram life already are doing them non-formally in a wedding way, and just like, I hate to stereotype, but I think just girls in general tend to like pay more attention to those little details and things.
Totally.
And he his first attempt was not amazing, I would say. And then like the thing that I love about teaching flatlays, especially in person, is there's this really closed feedback loop where like you do it, you get critique, you do it again, and like boom, you learn. And that's what's so awesome about it, is when you can create this immediate feedback of trying something and then getting a critique, getting some advice on it, and then implementing changes right away. It just clicks in your brain in a different way.
Yeah.
Then Yeah. So he was like my dark horse of like all of a sudden after like one little critique, he was like hand placing petals and like doing this gorgeous work. And afterwards we like put everyone's work we were just shooting mostly on cell phones onto my TV to like watch it together. It was at my house and to kind of go over them. And I didn't say whose was whose. And like everyone loved his the most. And he just like took off and ran with it. And his work is beautiful already. He's got a great eye for composition already. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't make the connection with flatlays, or once they've taken my flatlay course, like back to their other work, which like,
yeah.
I'm always like screaming this at the top of my lungs that like composition is composition is composition. It's all the same. So it's you can use the techniques that you've already learned creating imagery on flatlays. And if you take the flatlay course and like study composition, you can take that back to your other work. So it's hopefully clicking in people's brains in a different way.
No, totally. I think it's that's the biggest thing I saw. Even just looking at your not regular, but like your work as a whole, like composition is super, I feel like a big thing that you strive for, which I really enjoy, like looking at it. And I'm like, oh yeah, like this is like your work is so good. And it sounds so silly for like, but I feel like you'll get this is like the photos need to have this like the stronger the composition, the easier it is for you to get it as like a viewer. And like if you're not a photographer. And so like I feel like great photographs and flatlays included, like your work is so like good at face value, and then it is even better as you go deeper. Whereas like there's so much work out there right now that feels like very like flash in the pan, and there isn't a lot of depth, or maybe the composition isn't that great. So you're like, oh, this is a cool photo for other reasons, but I had to stare at it a while to find good things about it. And so all that to say, yeah, your work is wonderful. It's freaking awesome, Rebecca.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet. And it's amazing. Like we're photographers, so we do maybe stare at work for longer than others, but you know, normal viewers aren't going to take the time to really like stare at a photo that they don't know if they like. They're gonna like, it's like 0.003 seconds we have to catch someone's attention on Instagram before they just bounce. Like it's so quick. So we can use, it's funny, one of the like early podcasts I did years ago when I was first launching the Flatlay course, I don't even think I had the online one. It was just in person. And someone said to me, wow, it's like you're making art into a science. And I loved that and kind of grabbed onto it. And I'm like, oh, I'm using that as branding from now on for all my education work. And that's really what I was not the super artistic, like kid or art student in general. I went to NYU. I studied art history, photography, and aesthetic philosophy there, which I can talk more about because that really was a big influencer in how I approach my work. But I remember like being in art class with these Tisch students that's the photography school there. And it's very small. And I had to I wasn't actually at the photography school. I was in a school of individualized study where I kind of made my own major, and I had to talk my way into these art classes. And I remember just looking at these very blurry artistic photos and just being like, I don't get it, this isn't me, and not really understanding. And then, the more I, with contemporary art in general, the more you study it and the more you learn and the deeper you look, you can get more out of it. But I wanted to paint, I wanted to draw, and I have such bad skills at that. So for me, photography was the way I could express myself and find ways. And I'm such a rule player and need to understand the way things work, that for me to find my art, it was breaking it down into okay, what makes art good? And good is subjective. So what objectivity can I search for to create some form of art that universally will be accepted by at least a big portion of people? And that was kind of my journey into my work and my art. And that's what I try to give to other people through the education, is the empowerment to figure out these building blocks that they can use to do what they want to do, instead of copying what I'm doing and just like creating mini-me's, because like how boring would the world be if we all created the same work?
Totally. And I mean, I think too, like going backwards from what you talked about, one of the things I've been exploring, I feel like as I've gotten into my 30s, is like more fulfilling work. And I found that like, you know, in talking to my mentees and even exploring this for myself, and people talk about something like imposter syndrome, right? But it's like we only get that if we are like not being true to ourselves, or like haven't really done the work for us, you know, like if we're being a mini-me, right? We're just like, oh yeah, I use Rebecca, you know, her flatlay technique, all that stuff or whatever, or I literally just copy off hers. I have like a few in my pocket or whatever that is, like you talked about. It's like eventually, like if you're an ethical person, like it's just not going to feel as good as if like you came about it your own way, you know, like maybe how Rich did it, or like just finding out the ingredients yourself and then saying, okay, I'm going to make this for me, right? Like we can all like bake banana bread during this time or whatever, you know, and we might use the same ingredients, but it might taste different, and we might be able to like find our own way. And I think it'll be, you know, more fulfilling to like make it ours. And then it helps that balance of like, I'm an artist that also serves and gets paid for what I make. And how can I like fully love both of those things versus like just a business person that's like, oh, I'm just going to do whatever's hot right now. And then a true artist who's like, I don't care about business at all, you know, and they're going to do their own thing. But again, yeah, it's like that weird balance. So anyway, that's very off topic. But I feel like you're the kind of person that would be very into this conversation.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I just did like a whole other podcast on imposter syndrome, and I could talk about it for days and days and days. I mean, a big part of like when I don't know how deep you want to get into that topic.
As deep as you'd like.
But like, what? Sorry?
As deep as you'd like. We want to be better than the other podcasts you've been on.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, imposter syndrome is a really big thing that I've experienced. I grew up very lucky that I found photography at an early age, and I was able to study it. And my parents were very I don't know, they were worried about me being an artist, because they were like, you're not going to make money at it. So like that was part of why I didn't go to art school. They were like, you need to learn other things, which I'm actually very grateful for, because the art history and aesthetic philosophy portion of my study is a huge influence now on how I shoot and how I teach. And I love and grateful to have had that. But my mother is a very successful lawyer and was kind of that like glass ceiling shatterer, and that I like always watched and like wanted to be growing up. And in my, like when I was a kid and people asked me what I wanted to do, I would say like the boss or like the best. And they'd be like, of what? And I'd be like, I don't care, whatever I'm doing. And that like getting into photography, like that was, or getting into weddings, especially like leaving behind the fashion and editorial and documentary world, which in my head during my schooling times was more prestigious. And I was a little scared of getting into weddings, even though I loved it and did it on purpose. Like right from the get-go, I felt like I had to defend myself to the art students that I had been with for so long, and like my family and friends that even though they were supportive, there was just like this little bit of like, oh, weddings, like what happened?
Yeah.
And I'd have to be like, no, I love what I do. And then like my close friends and family would like they'd be like, yes, you shoot weddings, but she's like she's like famous. And I'd be like, nope, you're making it worse. Stop. Like, this is, like, you're making it so much worse. And I love what I do so much, but I did have this fear of, am I not fulfilling the potential of what I can be doing? So if I am going to do this, I need to be the best at it. And it really like wasn't until like, I'd say 5 years ago, which is embarrassing, but I think that's the difference. Like, as you said, between being in your 20s and your 30s, of realizing that there is no such thing as the best, that is not a measurable thing. And that if you're waiting for this external validation of you've made it or you're good enough, you're just never going to get it. It's never going to happen. And that's the imposter syndrome thing that I think, like in my head so many times, there were landmarks in my career that I was like, when I get in this magazine, when I'm on a cover, when I'm on this best of list, and those things happen and you don't feel any better. You're just as like, I don't want to say like empty inside, because I'm not empty inside, but I hope I'm not.
Glad, Rebecca.
But you feel that same nervous energy, I'd say, of like, can I relax? Have I made it? What do I need to do next? Like it's just on to the next. Whereas if you look internally and take pride in the work you're creating for yourself, for your clients, making your clients happy, making yourself happy, empowering my mentees, empowering all my students, seeing their work, that is what really makes me happy. And it's a recalibration in my head that I have continue to make. And especially like, with Corona and everything going on with quarantine, I had this like huge loss of identity that I'm still struggling with, of like, who am I if I'm not shooting? Like, what am I doing with my life? How do I feel about all this? I think everyone has kind of gone through a little bit of an existential crisis in the last 3 months. But I think, imposter syndrome never ends. I am happy to like shout that from the rooftops. You can meet every goal you've set for yourself, and you will not feel better if you are looking to be validated externally.
Yeah, no, totally. I feel like, my one like philosophy, this is my theory on imposter syndrome. We'll do this. And we did an episode a long time ago. I think it was like our 11th episode on imposter syndrome. And this is like me just kind of like ranting about it. But because I had gone through a very similar take as you, and trying to figure this out, right? Like it's a weird thing. And, like what we do, and, the idea that like I don't know if you care about this data, probably not anymore, but like when you're looking at like, oh, I'm converting at 15% or 25%, all of my leads to bookings or whatever, like that is, and that, like, imagine if people said like, oh, your goal isn't to get 100% of the customers that want you, but just like 20 or 10%. And so, but that means that like 90% of those people are going to turn you down for some reason. Some you can control, some you can't. Like that's going to mess you up mentally too. But at least one of the boundaries that I've put in place for myself for imposter syndrome, this is not our goal of the podcast, but this is a great stuff to talk about, is that I feel I have to check myself. Whenever I have imposter syndrome, it's usually because I am measuring my success by someone else's ruler. And I have to really tell myself like, no, like that's a whole different thing over there. What is your thing? Like you are only you, and whenever you try to be somebody else, then obviously you are an imposter. But it's like, okay, what is Rebecca's success? What does that look like? And what does Adam's success look like? And then like you mentioned, like my ultimate goal in life is like fulfillment. Like it's no longer to make cool photos for the sake of making cool photos, but like serving my couples in a way that is not just like momentary, or like what is my brand's effect in the world, and like who I want to serve and how I want to love them, and compete to help for the marginalized people groups in like my area and all that kind of stuff. And so it's like, okay, this is now bigger than just the camera. And I think like when I first started though, it was like, oh yeah, I wasn't happy unless I was chasing those little like achievements and contests and all that stuff, which is like good to, as a photographer, to go through, and like as as an art student, to have your work critiqued and cry and be yelled at and all that stuff. It's like part of the old way, especially on the East Coast. Obviously you're New York City, but it's like I think that has been my big thing. That's usually the thing I tell people too, is like, obviously it's not 100%. Like you can't, like you mentioned, like, yeah, you'll never stop, but it's that's the one check I have for myself, is like, okay, like, do I feel like an imposter, or is that just because I'm measuring it by someone else's like success or somebody else's ruler? Like, what does this look like for Adam? What does this look like for Rebecca, internally? And then usually that helps. And having like good friends and spouses and community that can help guide you as well helps as well.
Well, and you never know what someone's life looks like from the inside versus what you see on the outside. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation we can have about social media.
Rebecca, let's do 5 podcasts. Let's just do a series.
But I won't dive too much into that. But just when you say like measuring on someone else's yardstick, there's so many people that we look at that like look like they have these glamorous, amazing careers and that they're killing it. And the question is like, what does killing it mean? Is it money? Yeah. Is it, which like, but like, I don't think success and money are the same by any means. I think like, if this is your full-time job, hopefully you can like make a comfortable living for yourself and like have savings. So during times like this, we're not like out on the street, which is very important. So like, yes, money is important, but like that was never a driver for me. I think when people like, for me, I wanted to do work that I loved and that excited me, but I had all these like prestigious things in my head that I felt I needed to acquire to be able to do that work and like to feel that level of comfort that I think people like in 2017, I talk about this very openly. In 2017, I shot the Not Dream Wedding. I won the Rangefinder grand prize. Like from the outside, it looked like my life was great. I was traveling nonstop and, posting great stuff on Instagram. But in real life, from like August through like April of the following year, I was dealing with a really serious injury and health diagnosis that I had no idea what was going on. And like, I would be shooting in these glamorous places and then like home and like at doctor's offices or in bed nonstop, just trying to recover to go on to the next. And like, obviously I wasn't showing any of that on Instagram. Like, A, it's not like fun to look at. And B, I didn't want to worry my clients, which, luckily it didn't affect my work at all, but you don't know what's actually happening behind someone's Instagram, behind their website, whether there's emotional things happening, whether like they look super successful, but they're not making money. Like there's so many photographers out there who like are shooting these amazing European weddings and we're all like, oh my God, their lives are so glamorous. And they're living paycheck to paycheck. Like it's outward success, social media success, Instagram success is not real success. So when we look at like those yardsticks that we're measuring against, like we don't know what's really happening on the other side of someone's business.
Totally. Yeah. It's like a digital keeping up with the Joneses kind of deal. Like, yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, man, we are fired up. So give me a little bit of background. You told us a little bit about your, weren't growing up as like an artsy photo kid but then college, kind of pursued like, I would say like was, the equivalent of like very, very, deep and well-studied, like academic kind of art background. But then what was the transition like from there to where you are now? Like, were you into weddings at the time? Were you into like slowly getting into photography? Like you said, the other mediums maybe just weren't as, capable as photography was for you. Like, I know I can't paint or write or do anything fun in the art world. So like, what was that like for you? I want to know kind of a little bit of background of your story.
Sure. So I actually did start photography really young. I just wasn't like the super artsy photographer, I would say. Like I remember in high school, one of my photo teachers was like, you kind of create postcard photography. And I was like, is that a compliment or an insult? I can't tell. And what they meant like by that was like these beautiful compositions, but like not necessarily like deeper things happening, which took me a really long time to figure out how to connect with that inner artistry and find that. But I was the yearbook photographer. Photography, like that's why I said like kind of going through COVID and quarantine and not working was this existential crisis for me because I've been a photographer since I was 10 years old. And it's so part of who I am. It's so part of my personality. I don't know who I am without it. I was a really, really shy kid. I went to a really small elementary school and starting at my middle school / high school, like photography was the thing. Like having a camera in my hand was what enabled me to like go up to people and not hide in a corner. And it's funny because like anyone who meets me now, like I do a lot of public speaking and I'm, on Instagram and talking and like I don't seem remotely shy. And for a really long time, I used to joke that I was like an extrovert. I was the most extroverted introvert you'd ever meet. And I think it really dawned on me in the last few years that I'm actually like, I'm not an introvert anymore. I still get nervous in crowds of people I don't know, but like who doesn't? I still have like that fear. I think there's like two kinds of people in the world. There's like the person who assumes that everyone you meet loves you and it's on you to like keep them loving you or to like ruin it and make them hate you. Or there's the person who just believes that like everyone hates you from the get-go and you have to win them over or like prove them right. And I'm definitely in like that second category of like thinking that I have to win everyone over. So photography for me was like the way to win people over and like make people like me when I was really shy. So I loved it, but wasn't that like very artsy person. I had a very methodical approach to it, and I loved art. I took art history classes starting in high school, and when I went, like I interned at Sotheby's, I thought I'd work like in the auction house gallery world, and I love writing as well. I love writing about photography, and that's for many years I thought I would do that. I kind of wanted to be Susan Sontag, who, if anyone doesn't know her, pick up her books immediately on photography is incredible. She was Annie Leibovitz's partner before gay marriage was legal, so they were never actually married, and she passed away of cancer a while ago. Very sad, but her writing is incredible, and I highly recommend it. It was very influential on me and my work. And I went to school thinking I would do the kind of behind the scenes of photography as an agent or a manager or working in the gallery world, like kind of more corporate, because that's what made sense to me. And, having parents coming from like a more corporate environment, and really realized I had to shoot for myself, but when I started, I wanted to do fashion, worked in that world, realized it was so not for me. I did a total 180 and wanted to do documentary photography. What I was studying in school was how photographs can motivate social change and change people's minds. And that really excited me. And I kind of dove into that with a particular interest in climate change and universal human rights, specifically with children. I'm still doing work with UNICEF and did some with World Wildlife Fund and a few like local NGOs in different places I've traveled. And that's still, I feel like right before lockdown started, when I was on my way to Engage on the conference in Dubai, I went to Africa for 2 weeks first to shoot wildlife and kind of work on a project I've been doing for years. So that's still part of my work. But I found my way into weddings kind of, I don't want to say like haphazardly. I was definitely the art student who was like, I don't want to shoot weddings. Like there's no art to weddings. I was not that, like, I'm not married. I was not the kid who dreamed of my wedding by any means. Like I still say like I would probably elope. I think working in the wedding industry makes you have a different view on weddings than, I love them, and I don't mean to say anything negative about them at all. And I think, eloping and small weddings are probably going to be really popular for a while. So like, good thing that's what I like. And I like shooting that a lot too. So I found my way into weddings, starting to shoot like city hall elopements when I was living in New York, and still didn't think I would shoot a big wedding, because to me weddings were like my parents, like 1975, super cheesy, no artistry wedding photos, and I didn't see a space to be an artist in it. And then I went to a wedding in 2011. It was my cousin's, and it's like early days of Style Me Pretty, and she wore like this cool, colorful, blue-printed dress, and I was like totally that person that like we hate. Luckily, her photographer was so nice to me. Like, I don't think I would be this nice to me. I followed her around being like, ooh, what are you doing now? And what are you doing now? Oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I just fell in love with it and realized that everything I loved about photography, telling these emotionally beautiful, nuanced, layered stories, met the fashion and kind of whimsical, fantastical, romantic element in the same event. And that doesn't exist anywhere else in the photography world. Like everywhere else, you really have to kind of pick one lane and stick to it. And in weddings, we get to be 1,000 different types of photographers in the same day. And I started learning more about wedding photography and weddings in general, and reading Martha Stewart became my Bible. Asked to Style Me Pretty. I have every Martha Stewart probably dating back to 2011, which is when I started paying attention to weddings, and that was like my goal from day one. I was like, I got to get in this magazine, and I didn't make me feel any better when I did. I'm proud of that, and I loved it, but it didn't make me feel any better. But that was my long way into weddings, and really still influences how I shoot, of this like combination of the documentary and the fashion, and kind of bringing it all into one day.
That's awesome. No, I mean, there's definitely like now this is like the term, but like the editorial feel to your work, for sure. And that's kind of the term that like so many people use, but that everything makes so much sense now, like looking at your work and I'm like, oh yeah, she's been reading Martha Stewart for 9 years. Like, okay, yeah, like that it makes so much sense. And like, of course you're a badass at, doing like these details and flatlays and stuff like that. So I love that. That makes all the sense that we needed to know.
Well, hold on though. I just want to clarify that because I think where you look for inspiration is really dangerous sometimes.
Yeah.
And yes, like I was that person who poured over Martha Stewart and for a long time over Style Me Pretty, but I did take a break from it at some, especially like the online blogs. I took a big step back from that because I felt like seeing other people's work was clouding my brain.
Yeah.
And looking at the magazine, it wasn't that I like saw these images and was like, okay, how do I copy them? How do I emulate them? It was more like, okay, how do I break this down? What are the commonalities that I'm seeing in these images, in the types of weddings that this magazine is featuring? I was always a super analytical person. And I think that's something that a lot of artists don't do as much. And that's like, I think where, like we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and my weakness might not being as artistic as some other people, but I am super analytical and I'm really good at looking at something and figuring out like what the crux of it is and how to break it down so I can use it. So like I like creating these building blocks that I'm like, I can use to write my poetry and then give those building blocks to other people so they can write their own. But poetry, I mean imagery, like visual poetry.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that like I really don't, I don't want people to like get off of this and be like, oh, I'm going to have to like start reading the blogs daily and following all these people on Instagram and like pouring over this. Like, yes, that's good to be analytical and like understand the commonalities in these photos, but like looking at all the flatlays in Martha, that, a lot of them Shira was creating, and Shira is now a very good friend of mine, and she's been editing my new course all night. She pulled an all-nighter for me. She's amazing. And she just has a lot of this composition knowledge intrinsically in her brain, because we all do. And she's not necessarily like thinking out things the way I am. It just comes natural to her, where like it doesn't come natural to me necessarily. So I've had to like train my brain. And I want to put that out there very carefully, that when we look for inspiration, look at the building blocks and not like stylistically, oh, I should copy this and my work will get in the magazine. So that's not how it works.
Totally. No, I mean, it's at least for me, one of the things that we always kind of learned about when we were like studying work. And I had a few photographer friends who were a lot further than me when I first started, and they would literally like, it was very minimal punishment, if you will, if I got it wrong, but they would literally just send me photos like over text messages back in the day, and like and just be like, hey, what aperture do you think this was shot at? Or hey, why do you think you like this? Or like literally start trying to quiz me to get used to that analytical approach and be like, oh, well, like looking at an image and being like, okay, well, how do they do that? And maybe why, right? Like, because again, like that's the idea of the building block is like, well, why did they intentionally do this? Hopefully intention, so no, I totally get that. We're not trying to dog you and just be like, oh yeah, she just read all these magazines and this makes sense. If anything,
no, I didn't think that. I just like don't want that to be my message to people. Like that's literally like my worst fear. Like that's what I talk quite publicly against. So I just want to make sure I'm not putting that out there. No,
absolutely. Yeah. We said we don't want to make mini Rebeccas by any means, after, like copying off people. But I think the idea of like, there was a season, I do think, and this is some fun pushback, so don't hate me if I do this, but sure. Like there was some value for you to have a season of like the fire hose of inspiration and then from that you took the analytical approach of like, what do I do with this, which I think is totally fine. But like that, having that season of inspiration where you're like, okay, I do want to look at a lot of work that is valuable and what I enjoy, and then from there Rebecca was able to make it Rebecca's. But I think like that inspiration, that's the one thing I'm curious about in general, and I was going to ask you of like, how do you balance that? Like for somebody who's newer, like I think it's good for them to have that season of like, hey, just inspire, try to recreate, find out why, find your building blocks, find your Rebecca Yale so that you could be your own thing and make these things. But then eventually, yeah, like you mentioned, there is this thing where like if you're scrolling on Instagram or online, your art brain, if you will, your creative brain gets infected. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, I accidentally copied off this other person's work that I don't even like that much, or maybe I only liked it, a 7 out of 10, and that's not what I wanted to make, so that's just my, I guess it's not feedback, it's more encouragement.
I think it's studying versus imitating. I think studying is vital in all types of work. That, when I wanted to do fashion photography, I was studying the history of fashion photographers. I worked in Richard Avedon's archive when I was studying documentary photography, and my studies started with Louis Hine and Jacob Riis, and the first, which for anyone who doesn't know them, Jacob Riis wrote How the Other Half Lives, and his photos are a direct result from his photos were the tenement laws that got put in on the Lower East Side in New York at the turn of the century. Louis Hine's work of child laborers was a direct, the rules that were put in of no more child labor were a direct result. We look at Roy Stryker and the FSA photographers, Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans, and their photos helped end the Dust Bowl and were an essential part of the New Deal. That was what I studied for so many years, and then created my own documentary work. I wasn't, being oh, I'm going to be Dorothea Lange or I'm going to go do Walker Evans. I was learning what techniques they used, how they built a story, how they layered a story, how they shot, when they learning about the decisive moment from Henri Cartier-Bresson. It's no different studying wedding photographers whose work you love, but you have to study it like you're studying an artist and learning what they're doing and how that influences your own art. It's breaking down someone's art into technique. And once you can learn technique, you can use it however you like. That's what I always say with my educational stuff, getting into it, is I want to empower people to create purposeful images. That's always my goal. And you asked why earlier. And that's my first course ever that I did, More Than Pretty Tones. That's literally what that course asks. It's an intro to semiotics, and literally I think the first slide in it is a big why with a question mark. And that's what we should be asking ourselves when we're creating any image, is why am I creating this image? What is it saying? What story am I trying to tell? And being able to recreate things. I never want someone to stumble into a good image, whether it be a flat lay or a 3-dimensional image. You should know exactly how to create something and why. And then that just goes back to being analytical, even about your own work. That's something that I did for years, the same attention that I would put on these magazines of being why are these images captivating? How did they end up in the magazine? Looking at my own and identifying I would stumble into an image I loved and be okay, why do I love this image? Let's break it down. Let's use composition. Let's use all these tools that I know in the back of my head. And really quickly I could realize that there were triangles or Fibonacci spiral or whatever it was, being balanced, whatever it was. I could figure out then how to recreate that again and again and again. And that's always, I think, should be everyone's goal, is just being purposeful and not stumbling into things.
How does somebody create purposeful and captivating imagery of inanimate objects?
Oh, I mean, that's the still life photography, and still life in general, goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's where, I say, when you're studying, don't just study photographers, go study Dutch master lighting and, look at, learn chiaroscuro from Caravaggio, look at these, beautiful, there's such a rich world in painting that I don't think photographers look at enough. And that's what photography means when you break it down, is drawing with light. That's all we're doing, is using light to create I don't even want to say beauty, because a photo doesn't have to be beautiful, but whatever, a story, a narrative, whatever we're trying to do with that image. So there's a million different ways that you can tell a story, create something interesting and impactful with a still life, whether it be a flat lay or a three-dimensional thing. It's one of the first assignments that I give to any of my mentees or students when they're starting a program with me is, and this is like so photo 101 that like anyone who's taken a photo class like laughs and is like, oh yeah, I did that a million times. And it's to photograph the same object in 10 different ways. So it can mean lighting, it can mean perspective, and just like really starting to think about how all of those options change the opinion of what you're shooting. So, if you're shooting an apple, if you're lighting it very moodily, it changes what you're saying versus like if it's like light and airy and backlit, if you're shooting up on it, down on it, on its side, like there's just everything like that is a decision. And it's the same in still life imagery that like I realize, like when I was saying like I would study Martha Stewart, it really quickly dawned on me that these flat lay images that I loved from weddings were the exact same as the still life imagery I had studied for years in school. I worked for Avedon. His biggest contemporary was Irving Penn, and Penn's still life imagery, God, like for anyone who needs inspiration, like go out and like just start Googling. There's an amazing coffee table book of his work. And I actually have Fritz, like now, unfortunately, like I didn't frame it well, but I had torn it out of either Vanity Fair or Vogue, a still life image of his from like the early 2000s of chili peppers. And it was a flat lay of chili peppers before like flat lay was a term that we used, and we just still called it still life. And that was in like the kid, like I literally tore it out of a magazine and put it in a frame because I was like, this is such beautiful art. And I loved it. And that was something I stared at every single day, and it clicked in my head that like that was the same as the flat lays. And really, at least with a flat lay, all you have is composition. When you're shooting a still life three-dimensionally, there's a lot more that goes into it, of like what I was saying with those like the 10 different ways approach. That's a lot harder to do with a flat lay. Yes, you can change the lighting on it, and like I actually think it's super fun when I see people play with like moodier lighting or shadows on flat lays, because it's it's breaking the mold a little bit and doing something different. But for the most part, like you want even lighting going from like left to right and like leading the eye and allowing you to see everything there in kind of a clean way. And you're taking away all of the other like tools that you have at your belt when you're shooting something three-dimensional, aperture, showing movement, capturing something, choosing, like usually all the like choosing your shutter speed, your ISO, your aperture all has like a big effect on the mood and feeling of the photo, where flat lays, it's a little bit more like those things are consistent. So it literally just becomes about, can you create a captivating composition or not, and like tell an interesting story with it.
How does that work? Practically, like what is your, again, I'm just going to grill.
That was all fluff. Get down to it.
No. Yeah, no. I like it. But I want to, at the end of the day. So like I'm just here to grill Rebecca. No, I know. I want to know. So practically, how does that apply? Like, what can somebody do when they're like first starting and they have, 5 things like laid out before them, and there's a lot of pressure, I feel like, in the flat lay world, as far as weddings. Like if somebody does want it and like the couples are very into it or know what it is, even like if you ask anybody what a flat lay is, like they might not know what it is, but like if you are trying to do something with purpose and intention, and because these objects matter, let's just say that, because they matter to the client and the people that we're serving, like what is the practical thing on wedding day that they can do, or like should people practice like at home? Like, so give me some practical steps here.
Okay, so I'll start at the end, because that's something that's so important that I say, again, for all different types of photography, or all different parts of the day. Wedding days are not a time to practice. They are not a time to figure your, I don't know if I can swear on this, but figure your like S out. Like that's like, you wouldn't, if you're and like, oh God, I'm going to mess up the sports analogies because I am not a sports person, but I love this analogy. If you're like, the one thing I played was basketball, so I'll use that. Like, when you play basketball, you don't, like, the coach doesn't give you a brand new play that you've never tried before on the big game and tell you to like go run it, because you're going to screw it up. You don't know what you're doing. Like, you aren't going to try like making a basket or dribbling or like whatever it is, like a rebound. You're not going to try that for the first time on the day of the big game. You are going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours, if you're good at least. God, like, anyone who hasn't watched the Michael Jordan documentary yet, I'm still in like the middle of it, so I don't give anything away if you finished it. Don't give it away. But like, God, just watching him like that, like I related to that so much, of the like, where I say like, I might not be the best artist, but I'm going to try the damn hardest. Like, that was him. Like, he was like, I might not be like the most like native skills, like just in my body, but I am going to work the hardest and become the best. And like, I'm just so blown away by him and by that, because that's kind of where I come from in my head, where if you're thinking on a wedding day, you failed before you started. Wedding days are the big game, and you need to be in muscle memory at all times of the day. If you need to stop and think about anything, you're screwed. Like, hate to break it to you, but like, there is not enough time. Like, wedding days are beasts, and they're alive, and they're moving, and they're crazy, and we're dealing with so many things that if you're thinking about lighting or technique or any kind of, if you have to take the time to think, you're already behind. It all needs to be muscle memory. We need to like dig these like canals in our brains, like these grooves need to already be made. So like, our brains just like, boom, make that connection and go on a wedding day. So absolutely 100%, you need to practice anything at home. Practice your flatlays, practice how to shoot a tablescape, practice your lighting, like every single choice that you make on a wedding day. And like, you are making, if you don't think you're making choices, then like, again, you are 1,000 steps behind, and you need to reflect and start realizing that every single thing you're doing is a choice, and make those choices purposefully and be prepared, so you don't have to think like, okay, crap, it's a dark, oh, sorry, I'm swearing. I hope it's okay.
Crap is not a swear. It's fine.
Okay. So you can't be like in a dark reception room and be like, oh no, I don't know what to do. Like, trying to figure out how to handle that on the day is not going to work. It needs to be like, oh, like, it's like a flow chart that just needs to happen in your brain. Like, it's this situation with this, so this is what I do. And it's the same with flatlays, that you should be practicing a ton at home, and especially during this time. I mean, I know the world is slowly reopening. I'm a little bit more hesitant to go into the outside, so I am still staying quarantined, to each their own. But in general, it's still a more downtime. So use this time to practice and learn so many different things, especially flatlays are such an easy thing to learn in your home. Like, grab your shoes, grab your husband's shoes, grab your wife's shoes, like get an invitation. Minted is someone I've partnered with a bunch of times, and I'm actually working on something with later today that's more targeted at planners, but they have invitations that you can get, like samples, and you can play with those, where there's a million amazing artists that, I have so many stationery friends who have become, like, one of my stationery friends is now my best friend, and I adore her. Like, there's so many people that you can reach out to and get invites to practice with, because I think invites tend to be a little bit harder than you can get invites and practice. But honestly, like, when I started teaching flatlays, I was like, don't use pretty objects, don't use paper, don't use pretty shoes, because you get lost in the pretty. Like, use random objects. Like, there were so many times where like I'd be at an Airbnb with my second shooter trying to like help them, or my assistant, or both, and I would be like, grab 6 random things from around, this Airbnb, like from the coffee table, from the kitchen, and like just create an interesting shape and make sure that my eye is being led through this shape on a path and I'm not being like bumped out of it anywhere. And that's like, you know, the beginning of my Flatlay course is about movement, flow, and focus. And that's the say, like I'm working on these posing guides now, because for the longest time I was like, it's the same, guys, just take these lessons and apply it to three-dimensional things. And like people weren't. So I was like, okay, I'll do it for you. So that's what I'm doing now, but it's all the same. It's this idea of your eye reads a frame the same way that we read a book, and we deep read it in the same way. Or I mean, it's a different technique, but it's the same effect of how we glean knowledge from something that we're looking at. And if we're purposeful in the way we direct our viewer's eye through that frame, we can keep them engaged in it longer. Like going back to what we talked about at the beginning, where like you have like that 0.003 seconds to grab someone's attention. So on a wedding day, like practically, again, like you're like, okay, there's a lot of fluff. On a wedding day, if you don't really know how to do flatlays, ask if you can take home the wedding invitation and practice. Again, if you're headed into a wedding day and don't know how to do it, and it's something that's important to your client, you're behind before you started, and that's so hard.
Totally.
So if you can take it home and work on it, that will help. But practice at home, so you don't need to think about it on the wedding day. It should just be like, boom, this works. And it's something I get asked all the time of like, oh my God, there's so many things to remember in your Flatlay course. Like do you run through all of these 10 steps in your head and like spell check basically? And I'm like, no, of course not. Like I just create. And if I feel like something is wrong, then I'll use the thumbnail rule, which is the last of the steps that I go over, which like really is this like spell check kind of thing where when you have a bigger composition, it's harder to really see the actual composition in it, where when you make something smaller and make it into a thumbnail and kind of look at it from farther away, when you make something smaller, it really becomes all about the composition because you decontextualize what you're looking at, which is why I suggest when you're practicing, using random objects like a banana and a paperweight are going to be helpful, because it becomes all about that composition. So if you're struggling with a Flatlay on the wedding day, taking a photo just on your cell phone, and then like I literally like look like an old person trying to read my phone, I will like hold it as far away from me as I can, making it into like as small of a thumbnail as possible. And that's when I'll be like, oh, okay, like this doesn't fit because it's top heavy, or like this color is pulling my eye. And that's still something I do regularly. And it's something that you don't see when it's large, and you can see when it's small.
That's so great. That's a really, really good tip that people don't think about, but it's like, yeah, people only think about their images being big and like, oh, what risk am I taking by making it larger? But then at the same time, like the composition, it needs to be, again, like we talked about, like obvious, you know, when it's small and you're like, okay, here it is. Okay, how do I need to adjust? What do I need to fix? So no, I appreciate that. I'm sorry that it feels like I'm like grilling you. I'm like, oh, we don't need fluff. We need but no, I like the fluff too, because it's like I think the idea too is that this isn't just obviously for you and myself, but like it isn't just I'm throwing a bunch of the Brad shit on the floor and I'm going to take a photo of it. You know, like it is like that. And I feel like people don't realize that. And there are days when I've been there, or I've seen other photographers do that. And like, it's just like, why? And they're like, yeah, like Rebecca is a master at this, but here's the recipe of like how she got there. And obviously like there's a lot of studying and a lot of practice and a lot of inspiration. And I think too, like we as wedding photographers too, and one of the things I'm getting from this so far is that like we look at good photographers and great photographers have looked at a lot of imagery, period. Wedding, anything else, all kinds of stuff, right? And again, you're going to have even an extra batch from your art history, like that is, and just your intentionality of greatness, if you will, that you are chasing down, which is great. And I think so many photographers, I just know so many photographers that just don't look at imagery. And I'm like, guys, you just have to look at everything. Like one of my favorite photographers is like Nick Brandt. And I look at all his stuff and I'm just like, he's one of the
I'm like smiling really big. You can't see me.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I like his photo he posted last night. I was just like, what in the world? Like, because you could easily see some of his photos. You'd be like, oh yeah, dude takes photos of elephants. Doesn't everybody take photos of elephants? But then, which is a whole other conversation. But then he's just doing these things where I'm like, oh, I have no idea what's happening. And I've shot 1 million images. Nick's probably shot 10 times that. Okay, what does that look like and feel like for me?
Well, although his images are so intentional, like he isn't the spray and pray photographer. Like he's out there in the African plains shooting with like an 8x10 camera. He actually used to be represented by Staley Wise, which is a fashion photography gallery in New York. And I used to know the curator there because she used to be at Avedon. The world is so small. But I met him at his, I think a Shadow Falls. I think it was the opening for that. I went to it in Soho when I was still living in New York. And he is the kindest man ever. He's so sweet and like totally let me fangirl over him. But the like God, like talk about intentionality. Like for anyone who doesn't know his work, like look it up immediately. It's these incredibly powerful black and white images of wildlife in Africa. Sebastião Salgado is someone I really recommend too. If someone likes Brant, to check out his work. It's absolutely incredible. And the intentionality that goes into these images, like I think that's something I see all the time is like the spray and pray method, which if anyone doesn't know that term, it's like you take enough photos, you luck into a good one. But like, that's my goal, is to not luck into it, to like, you might luck into it the first time, but then be analytical, figure out why it's good, figure out what you like about it. And like, I love that you're looking at wildlife photography. Like that's what we should all be doing, is looking at things way outside of what we do and see where we can draw inspiration from. Like I went to a show, I can't remember if it was the Getty or LACMA, with another wedding photographer a few years ago that was, I think it was Diego Rivera and Picasso, and it was like some of their darker work. And they really were not depicting people in a very flattering way. And I remember like talking to her about like, God, it would be fun if we could experiment with these types of things a little bit more and, not have to always worry about making our clients so pretty. And there's definitely types of wedding photographers who don't worry about that at all. And like, that's not me or my work. Like I really like, I want to treat my subjects the way I would want to be treated, which is to make them look good. But there's this beauty and just fascination behind all these different approaches of subjectivity, of how you as the photographer can change the way someone feels about whatever you're shooting, whether it's a person or a still life. And I know I'm like going on a total tangent now, but I'll just real quick, when I told people to read Sontag, the other person that, because reading too, like God, it's so, so important. You get just as much from reading about photography as you do looking at it. And Roland Barthes is the other, like you can only read two writers on photography, I would say Susan Sontag and Roland Barthes. His On Photography, he sets up this whole idea of the operator, the person who's taking the photo, the spectrum, which is the subject of the photo, and then the spectator, which is the person looking at the photo. And we're the operators, we're the ones taking the image. And we completely can change the spectrum, the subject of the photo, and the way the spectator interprets it by the way we shoot it. And so that's what I mean by like lighting or angle and all of these different things. And you need all of that in the back of your brain going into, I'm sorry, I'm talking with my hands and I just hit the microphone. Sorry.
It's all good.
Sorry if it just made a loud noise. I'm a hands talker, which none of you can see. But having all of this in your gray matter and really trying to understand how much of a viewpoint and perspective we have as an artist and how we can really change what we're saying about the subject of our photo is so important and is going to make you a better artist.
I love that. And like the importance, I know for me, some of my background is that I went to college on a full ride for classical guitar, but
that's awesome.
Ironically toured in a metal band, which again, like both those worlds hate each other. At first glance, we're like, oh, like rock music, that's whatever, and you have to kind of defend that the same way we defend weddings to art people, and then vice versa. this kind of like, oh, classical, like, but can he shred, bro? And so, it's one of those
things. The greatest art comes from when those things meet. Like, I love listening to interviews with Lizzo. I think she's so cool and fascinating. I just like admire her in so many ways.
I love that. Future podcast guest.
What?
I said, hopefully future podcast guest someday.
Oh my God. Right. Yeah. She did an interview on Fresh Air on NPR, which I love. And she was, I just re-listened to it. It was, I think like last summer, but I just re-listened to it a few weeks ago because I loved how sassy she was and like kind of like pushed back in a few times that I was like, ooh, you are brave. And I hope that I don't think I'm being interviewed about quite the same things, but I hope that I am brave and honest in my interviews too. But she was talking about her background as a classical flautist and then bringing that into the music world that she's now doing, which like no one's really ever done before. Yeah. And like, that's part of what makes her such a badass and like makes us love her music so much. And it was such a different sound than a lot of us had ever heard before. And I love that. I love that like you can take these building blocks, no matter what you're doing, like everything's the same. If it's music, if it's writing, if it's painting, like there are tools at your disposal and you can create something fantastic by learning them and then implementing them in a way that only you can.
100%. Yeah. My, where I was kind of going with that was to,
Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. As Rebecca has, basically
I'm the worst.
broken my bookshelf now because I've added so many books to my Amazon wish list now. It's the one book I was going to recommend, which is literally what you talk about though. So in the music world, there was this thing, this book called Effortless Mastery by Kenny Warner. And the exact idea was like making greatness muscle memory or making excellence muscle memory to where like it's no longer something you have to think about where you put your toes if you're playing football or playing basketball or where you're putting your hands or where the light is. Like it literally is just, oh no, that's what we're doing. That is where we're going, because so you can get through that flow chart that you talked about so much faster, and so that it feels like nothing, right? Your brain still did it, but you're just like, oh no, okay, yep, I know exactly where I'm heading because we have done this so many, many times. And like it almost starts with like, doing the basics well, right? And like really walking through that. And then over time, you'll be able to do like something complicated, but it's going to just take time. Like you have to learn how to walk before you can run, like very basic. But like once you can walk, like all of us listening, most of us, I assume, can walk or can breathe or whatever. Like you don't have to think about it, where there was a time when we had to think about it. And
it's exactly, I always say it's like learning a new language. Like visual language is a language that eventually, like right now, if I tried to speak French, I would sound like an idiot because I'm very out of practice. But if I did it every single day, eventually I wouldn't be like, oh, what is that word? I wouldn't be searching for it in my head. Yeah. Those grooves, I love cognitive behavioral therapy and have spent like a lot of time for many reasons in my life researching that and trying to understand how our brains work and why. I think like the idea of rewiring our brains is so fascinating. Before I got into weddings, I was planning on doing either a Fulbright or a Rhodes Scholarship to go to the Congo to photograph bonobos or bonobos, depending on how you pronounce it, because I think the way their brains are wired versus chimps is so fascinating. So like I am a dork to the like hardcore level of brain chemistry and like why our brains work in a certain way, but being able to manipulate it and create these pathways that then our brain just goes like boom, that I'll say like I won't keep going on about like esoteric reading, but I promise that both on photography and any of Sontag's Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes or On Photography by Sontag aren't like hard reads. They're very interesting, but On Photography has a chapter in it, Sontag's book, called In Plato's Cave. And that's, I'm not going to go tell everyone to read The Republic because everyone is going to like turn this podcast off. But I love sharing this example as a way of kind of helping people understand that it's not so scary, that if anyone hasn't heard the allegory of Plato's Cave, I will summarize it very quickly, which is the idea of, it's the idea of enlightenment. So it's the idea of these prisoners are trapped in a cave and their entire lives they're chained up, staring at a cave wall, and there's a fire behind them. So they are just seeing shadow their entire lives. And there's guards moving behind them. So there's guards, shadows that are being projected on the wall. And that is their reality. That is all they've ever seen. Like they were born and lived in this cave. That is their universal truth. That's what they know. One day, one of the prisoners escapes, goes into the real world and goes, oh my God, like everything I thought was real was just a shadow. And this is the real world. This is everything. And then he goes back and tries to tell the other prisoners, and the prisoners kill him, because that's the idea of we don't like being enlightened. But I like to stop the allegory before we get there and just get to the point where he's out in the world and it's ooh, I've learned so much. And once you realize that your entire world was shadows, you can't ever go back inside the cave.
Totally.
You can never move backwards. You can never be oh no, I'm going back to this and being satisfied with the shadow world. Once you've seen the real world, you'll never think the same again. And that's how visual language works. And that's what's when, go back to the beginning of this podcast, when you were talking about Rich, that's what clicked in Rich's brain super quickly, was the, these elements. And once you know them, and you can never go back to a time where you don't know them. And it's actually I always joke that I make people the bitchiest critics ever, because you go, once you learn these things, you go back and look at your old work or other people's, and you're oh my God. And I do that with my own work, especially right now I'm working on these posing guides, and I'm going back to my work from 2011, 2012, 2013. And I'm whew, I thought this was good. And you can't unsee things. So that's the magic of once these concepts click, they're there. They don't go away.
Yeah, totally. No, 100%. That's what I say. We do portfolio critiques with some of our mentees, but a lot of it at entry level is very simple composition things, or or just pet peeves, right? I always tell them, I say, hey, this is not the end all be all, but this, at the end of the day, this could just be what Adam thinks. But one of my things is oh, you put the horizon behind the couple's head, and that is a no-go for me. And they're once I explain it to them and show them why I don't like it, or I show them the better, what we were looking for, if there is where the water meets the land behind the couple's head, I'm oh, please no. But once I show them something else, they're oh, and then I get a text usually a week or two after that goes, Adam, I hate you, and I can't see this ever again. And that's really how it all works. Not as intense as Plato's story, but have you ever read Flatland?
No, I haven't.
Okay, yeah. So it's a, probably a moderate, especially for you. You could read this literally while you're cooking at the same time, I imagine. But because as I've learned, you're a hyper nerd. But the Flatland is basically these 2D objects who eventually learn what 3D is, and so it's a very similar take. And so it's just one of those things where you're oh, this is this crazy enlightenment thing that is happening. I want to ask you two questions before this turns into a 3-hour podcast, which I would love, but everybody else has turned us off by now. Which is totally fine. Yeah, there's probably a diehard 11 people who are yes, give me more. This is so juicy. We were sick of the Instagram following episodes. This is the meat we want.
But you know what? Hold on. Let me just say something on that, because I really did think forever that people did not want to listen to this. I was really resentful when I was getting into education. I had this big chip on my shoulder of seeing this huge problem of these huge styled shoot workshops that were creating identical work and not actually teaching anyone how to shoot. It was just creating this beautiful portfolio that then didn't give the photographer any knowledge of how to recreate that on their own. So the work that they would create at these workshops versus their own work looked nothing like each other. And I was looking for second shooters out in LA when I moved out here, and was what is happening? I thought I was mixing up photographers, and I realized nope, this is the same person. Just one was taken over another photographer's shoulder and one was created on their own. And I was people have been asking me to teach for a while. And I was no, I don't want to be part of this. I really think this is awful. And no one wants to listen to me talk about Plato. No one's going to show up. And I was angry about it. And I didn't give people the benefit of the doubt. And trust me, I can show you some sales numbers. People want to hear me talk about Plato. thirst for deeper knowledge out there. And that's like, again, I think part of being in your 20s versus your 30s of like that resentment that like I realized like, God, how lucky I was to be able to go to art school. It's not that people don't want this. It's that they didn't have the opportunity to. And I was so lucky too. And if I can share that now with people, like how incredible. So I do think some people care about this.
No, totally. No, I'm just giving you a hard time. So no, I love it. I love it. I have 2 questions for you. So, and these are both like, you're going to hate me for these questions, but one, what is the number one like problem you have seen in both your like in-person education and workshops and that kind of stuff, to where like, what's the number one mistake that you see a lot of people making when it comes to flatlays and you want to fix? Like, what's the number one thing that you're like, oh, everybody does this. Why are they doing this?
I think it is lack of intention and narrative in what they're creating. It's, composition aside for a second, which like there's a lot of compositional things that I could talk about as well. But the biggest, like my biggest pet peeve when we talk about pet peeves is like the crane scissors or like the gardening shears like thrown in every single image ever. And I'm like, why? Especially with an invitation, your invitation image should invite your viewer into the rest of the wedding day or the editorial, whatever you're creating. It should really set the tone, both color story of like everything you're about to see and in mood. So I will see these like soft, organic styled fine art, like silks and like soft flowers and, a lot of movement and texture, flatlays with like random props that are lovely. But then the wedding is like black and white and super harsh and like maybe didn't have any flowers at all. And those are like random flowers you brought with you. Like that is a huge pet peeve of mine and is doing a disservice to your work and your clients' work. Style with intentionality, have a story that I like. This is something when we talked about the why earlier that I say for flatlays and for any image really is the caption it rule. This is something that like is a huge part of my posing guides that I'm working on right now is if you can't caption an image, you probably shouldn't be putting it out there. Like unless like you're trying to create something surrealist and absurdist or like very like quote unquote editorial that like feels fashion influenced and like does it like it's a little fantastical and doesn't need to feel like reality. But otherwise, like if you can't caption, like a flatlay should really easily describe what the rest of the wedding day is going to look like. A photo of your couple should say something about them, about their love, about who they are, about their relation to each other. If it just feels like strange, or like it just feels pretty, I'll say, like I won't, like strange is a harsher word. I'll just say if it just feels pretty, that's where you get in like my more than pretty tones territory of what's the point? Like what's the point of a pretty image? It should mean something. And that is so important with flatlays. So think like talk to your bride, talk to your groom, talk to the wedding planner, talk to the florist, like whoever you need to talk to, get a sense of what the day is going to look and feel like. So if you do want to bring props or a styling board or anything, and like also don't go out there and like buy a huge expensive styling kit and then just expect your work to be great. Like my styling kit is super cheap. Like that's something that like people are always super surprised that like I don't invest a lot of money in these like expensive props and things. I try to work with what my clients have for the most part. And then I get some like generic things at like flea markets, or like if I know I had a client who had bumblebees as a big part of their day because their names were both bees. So it was like BB became a big part of their day. And like I found these cute brass bumblebees that like I think cost me $2 on Etsy. So like, yeah, that investment I will make, but I probably will not throw that in another random flatlay. I will wait until I have another something that has to do with bees and I will bring them back out. But style with intention.
That would be very obscure. Like another client, they're like, "What? The bees are very original. This is so cool. Why did you have these?" And you're like, "Oh God, somebody put these in there." You know, if it's not the wedding that was appropriated for. I love that. That was going to lead me to my next question. Was like, as somebody who has like my styling kit right now, Rebecca, I'm scared to admit this to you now, this deep in the podcast, is sticky tack. That's literally the only thing I've heard
what, sorry?
Sticky tack, like what a teacher uses. So that was literally from probably like 8 years ago. I was seeing all these like beautiful ring shots where the ring was in like a not... It was like in a physics defying position where I was like, what is happening here? And again, 8 years ago, I was very impressionable to where I was like, oh, this seems cool. And a photographer, I was like, so how do you do that? And he was like, oh, sticky tack. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah. And I just Photoshop it out. And I was like, I hate you. Like that was such a cheap trick, but it worked so well. I mean, I've had been bamboozled, if you will. But what is you don't have to reveal everything by any means, but like what are some staples, pun intended, of your styling kit? Like what is that? Or where can people get started? Like what is the thing you're like, hey, this will make things a little bit easier for you to channel. Let's ideally say that you have the intention correct. Like this will help you with like, okay, I can't get the shoe where I want it.
So the most important things that I would say to have in your styling kit would be risers. Like that is number one, that you want some dimensionality in your imagery, that our eyes love depth, we love texture, and having that drop shadow makes it or breaks it. I have as part of that intro course, when I talk about the importance of risers, I show the exact same image with risers and without. And that like Shira was the one from Shira from Martha Stewart. Shira Svada was the one who taught me about risers, and it like totally blew my mind. And I felt so stupid because I was like, I've studied flatlays, or I've studied still life imagery. Flatlays wasn't really a term back then, but I was like, I studied this in school so much, and I know the importance of depth and shadow, and like have played with this so many times in like majorly controlled studio environments. Like, how did I not make this relation that it's the same thing? So risers will be your best friend, and they will take an image just like skyrocketing in difference between having a flat, like a truly flat image, and a flat lay that has some depth and interest to it, even if you have zero styling items. And there's a lot of, I'm working on an album right now for a client from like last October, sometime in the fall. And it was a very simple wedding. It was a very beautiful wedding, but like very clean aesthetic. And there's zero flowers in their flat lay. And that's something that I do a lot. If it's like a very simple, clean aesthetic, then like I said, you have to style smartly. So props and lots of flowers and all of that, yes, can sometimes really add to the narrative and be smart and helpful. But having the basics down is always going to be the most important and first part. So like you said, staples can be great risers. They break, so they can be super annoying. I really like washi tape. The like Japanese paper tape. I always had it in my bag because I shoot Kodak, and Kodak doesn't always stick very well. So I would always just have washi tape to, I'm kind of like I think I'm like the dad from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and washi tape is my Windex, where he's just like put it on everything and it cures all. Like that's kind of how I feel about washi tape. Like on a wedding day, I have like taped a bridesmaid's shoe back together. I have taped my film. I have like taped paper or flowers down to my flat lay. It's kind of a magical cure-all. I've used it as a Band-Aid. You can use it for anything. So if I have hem things, I could go on and on. But washi tape is a great riser. There's plenty of clear acrylic blocks out there that you can buy. I will be 100% honest. I do not use any of those. If you look in my flat lay community on Facebook or on my Instagram or anything, I'm very honest about what I use, and I will never endorse something that I don't actually use. I'm not like anything that I endorse or say that I use, I'm not paid for it. Like I don't take kickbacks from anyone, and I refuse to like promote anything that I don't personally use. I'm not saying it's not a good product by any means. It's just, I don't need it for my work is what I'll say. I do love the roll-up styling surfaces, and I think having a couple of those in like some neutral colors is a great place. If you are looking to invest a little bit, is a great place to start, because a lot of times the spaces that we're shooting in for getting ready, it's like ugly carpets and just not very nice backgrounds, and we want just a cleaner background as our canvas, like literally canvas to start from.
Yeah.
So I love Chasing Stone, newer company that just came out. I love the Locust Collection ones, and those were both created by photographers. So I think and really wonderful photographers. So I think they understood at a deeper level like what tools we actually needed, because they like saw a need and made something. So I really like those. I wouldn't go out and buy like 100 of them and have them in every color. Like that's where you can use styling tools to create the color story. You're like, if you have a yellow and pink spring wedding, there's probably yellow and pink flowers. So if you're styling on like a tan or like somewhat neutral backdrop, then you can use the flowers to create that color story. I don't think you necessarily need a pink backdrop as well. So there's cheap, easy ways that you can like make certain investments and basics. Like same with like Mrs. boxes. Like I find them really nice and just easy to use to make the ring stand up, so you're not doing any like gravity defying things. In addition to the like putty that you were talking about, fishing wire is that's actually something that's not even in my course, that I didn't even really think about using, and I used it all the time when I was in the fashion world. And Carrie Goldberg was the one who reminded me, like I completely forgot that Carrie works at Bazaar, and I had completely forgotten that I used to like literally string up shoes with fishing wire or rings or all these things, and then like it was my job to Photoshop it out. I worked at a retail store for on the photography side for a summer in college. And that was what I did for like 12 hours a day. So I don't know how I forgot it, but that's a really good tool as well. Although you do have to know that you might have to Photoshop out some of that. But I think just anything that like, I don't want to like get back to building blocks because that's, being annoying, but anything that styling wise, that is a building block that can help you create something versus just being pretty in and of itself, I think is a great place to start. So something like a neutral ring box, a neutral backdrop, and then risers, which like washi tape costs like 10 cents. You can get it in bulk at like any art store or Amazon, or like go crazy with all the fun colors and things, but you're not going to see them anyway. So just get the cheap ones.
I love that. I mean, that's a tip in and of itself, is like, you're not supposed to see these things that we just talked about, like at least the actual like toolkit kind of things, or know that
you should not see risers.
Yeah, exactly.
Something's wrong if you're seeing them.
I love that. Well, seriously, that was an incredible rundown. I feel like this is for the people that are really striving to go deeper and try to better themselves both artistically, and then hopefully if that lands in their flatlay creation, if you will. And it's something that right now we all could be practicing right now, during the time of this podcast. So
totally. Well, and it's really an easy way to elevate your portfolio too. This is something I've talked with a lot of my mentees about during this time, where they're like feeling really stuck. Like a lot of them, I feel like everyone was like, 2020 was my year. Like I was so that person too. So like, I get it. I feel it's just very funny that I think everyone felt that way. And then it's like, wah, you make plans and like God laughs. And I think that's what's happening right now to all of us. But if you still are trying to find a way to work and elevate your portfolio when you're in quarantine, flatlays are such an easy way. Like I don't want to like encourage people to like break the law by any means, but like you can buy a pair of fancy shoes and like shoot them very carefully. Do not wear them. Do not scuff the bottoms and return them. I'm not saying that's something I've ever done, but I'm just saying that's an option that you can, if you're looking for ways to like make your portfolio look like a higher end client that you're trying to appeal to. Flatlays with shoes, with rings, with stationery are a really easy way to add photos to your Instagram and your portfolio in general that elevate you taste-wise of the client you're trying to shoot if your real weddings aren't looking like what you want to be doing.
I was going to let you go, and now I have a more fun question for you that will either, again, every question is, will she hate me, or will she be like, oh, this is interesting? And this is out of curiosity, and why do flatlays and details and, really well intentionally photographed, styled details, flatlays, etc. Why are they associated with higher end clients? And I mean that not in like why do we do that to increase our value as photographers, but like, why is a higher end client attracted to that? Why is that a luxury thing?
So I think luxury means different things to different people. And I think that's really important to remember. And I don't think every luxury client necessarily cares about it so much. I do think that when someone is spending, and like, God, it really doesn't have to do, like I say, like money doesn't buy taste all the time. And I really, truly believe that with such a passion. And I think that when someone is spending a lot of time, and like, yes, money often comes into it, but just time planning out all of these details, they want them photographed beautifully. They want to remember their invitation that they spent, that they've invested in, whether it's time or money or both. And same with their shoes. They want their ring, all of these little things, their programs, when they're styled well, they become these like ephemeral touch points that unlock memories of the rest of the day. So you can look at this invitation and all of a sudden have these memories flooding back into your head. Same with like the programs or the favors or whatever it is you're styling in that particular image. Again, when it's done well, should become part of the narrative just as much as the documentary images. And I think it's the idea of someone spending, like making that investment and just wanting to see it done nicely. I think in a more like practical, like I don't want to get like wishy-washy again with my answers, on a practical sense, I think magazines like Martha Stewart showed them so much, and that was a higher end wedding. So a lot of those photographers and brides who were reading it wanted it. But like Grace Ormond is also a luxury magazine. It's a very different style than Martha Stewart. But the photographers who are shooting more the Grace Ormond and the planners, like I worked with a planner last year who was kind of more of that Grace Ormond style. And I remember getting a call from them being like, so the bride says you need a bucket? Like, why? What are you doing with this bucket? And I was like, no, a bucket of flowers, like not just a bucket. And they were like, I don't understand what's happening here. And this is like a very high-end, amazing planner who works with like $1 million clients, but hadn't really worked with a photographer like me before. So I don't think flatlays necessarily equate to luxury. I think it's just someone is investing energy, time and money, either or, and wants something beautiful to come from it.
I love it. It was nice to hear you have a different answer, I feel like, than the other ones that we had listened to earlier, just to be like, oh, I wanna quiz Rebecca. So but I was just curious, like the association. So I love that. Well, hey, I want to get you out of here and get you back to your day and your weekend. So tell me, where's the best place? What do you have going on in the future? Like education, what does that look like? Both in the time of Corona, but then also just the time of your future. I know that looks like a lot of online education. So get us excited about that, and where is the best place for people to go find that and say hi and to annoyingly DM you about all the things flatlay, which is going to happen.
I really don't mind at all. For all things flatlay, I would say don't DM me on Instagram. Do it in my community on Facebook. I have a Flatlay styling group on Facebook, which you can search for. It's public. Anyone can join. I will say that in Corona, I have not been as good at being a part of it and moderating it, but I'm trying to get better. Usually I am very involved in it, and I love giving feedback and giving critiques in that group. You don't have to have bought my course by any means to be part of it or to get my feedback. The only reason I've been less part of it is I've just been trying to stay off Facebook a little bit more. I think we're all kind of coping in our own ways and figuring out how we need to stay mentally well during COVID, and being off of Facebook was kind of important to me for that. But I'm trying to dip my toe back in, just being careful in my interaction there. And same on social media. I'm a little bit quieter on Instagram at the moment, but I do check my DMs, and I'm always I don't have someone managing it for me. It's me. If you follow me, you're going to see a lot of my dog. So feel free to message me there. But if it is Flatlay specific, bring it into Facebook, because it's also fun. You'll get responses from other people as well, which is awesome to get group opinions on things. Education wise, I just did my first Zoom workshop, which was super fun. I have a course that I call my A and B workshop, the art and business of wedding photography, which I kind of try to think of as my 6-month mentorship program boiled down into 2 very intense days. And I was going to be doing it in person, and I switched it to Zoom, and it was awesome. I definitely learned that it needs to be a smaller number of students. So that I will try to do it again later in the year on Zoom, and keeping it to probably 5 or 6 students max. And I have 4 actually new e-courses coming out. I have one that should be coming out in, I don't know when this is airing, but in the next few weeks from now, so mid-June. So if this is after June, it's already out. Go find it. Called Wedding Workflow, and it's all about the systems and logistics that go into being a good wedding photographer. So not as much the art and everything that we just talked about, but the same idea of like the wedding day is the big game, and if you're not prepared, then you're already behind. So it's things of like, how do we set ourselves up for success, and what do we do when things go wrong, which it's a wedding day, inevitably they will. So what can we do to prepare ourselves, both in like building the shot list and the timeline, and educating our clients and educating our team, how to create a shot, like, yeah, all that fun stuff. And then 3 courses are coming out on posing, bride and groom separately, couple posing, so bride and bride, groom and groom, and bride and groom, and then group posing, which is like bridesmaids, groomsmen, full wedding party, family, that Vanity Fair elusive shot that everyone wants to know how to take. I break it down and make it into science. So hopefully you guys can all take it. And you can find all of that. If you have my name, you can find me, for better or for worse. I'm very easy to stalk. If you put in Rebecca Yale, you will find me on Instagram. I'm RebeccaYale.com. I'm Rebecca Yale on Instagram. I'm easy to find.
I love that. I'm like, oh, this is an invitation. This is not a warning. This is like, please find me.
Please don't come murder me, but talk to me. I'm happy to talk.
Liam Neeson, if you're out there. No, I love that. Well, seriously, Rebecca, thank you. This was such a blast. I would encourage everybody to go check it out. I am a fan. I have one of your, I believe I have the Flatlay PDF, and then I think I have something else of yours. So I've been a big fan. It's helped me a lot, and it's one of those things that, like, you, especially after this, now I want to go back and look at it again and be like, oh, okay, like I have Rebecca's voice in my head telling me these certain things, so these principles. So I'm a big fan, and I feel like,
and that PDF is a free resource. I just, I want to make that clear that I have video courses on Flatlays, but I have a PDF, both on my Behind the Frame series, which is kind of like an intro into deeper thinking about your imagery in general. And then I have some tips for Flatlays that doesn't dive quite as deep as the course, but there's a lot of great information in there, and that is free on my website. So
guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Rebecca Yale. She's just an incredible artist, educator, and she's just a friendly, nice person who, again, as a talker, like, this episode easily could have been like 17 hours long, which maybe we'll do someday as like a marathon, like a fundraiser charity, but she is just absolutely incredible. I would encourage you to follow her on Instagram, go say hi, and pursue her education. She's just really, really incredible. Love her. Guys, tonight in the Facebook group, come join. Rebecca Viola is going to hop on, talk about some Instagram following, building techniques. And then, of course, if you haven't already, join the Patreon if you want to support the podcast. It's only $10. Love to have you guys. Have a wonderful day, guys. Keep being awesome.